Hey, it's Nathan. I have so much to tell you guys. I'm recording this from the playground in my neighborhood here. I live just outside of Dayton, Ohio, and I live in the town that I grew up in. And this park that I'm in is one where I played soccer as a kid. And there's a playground here, and I'm here watching my 8-year-old and my 5-year-old. I have two boys run around on this playground. And it's not the same equipment that was here when I was a kid. They've replaced it all with newer, cooler, I have to say, stuff. But I don't know. I always get a little nostalgic when I come to a place like this. So you might hear, some road noise. We live right by a freeway, so you might hear that. You might hear kids playing. There's some kids over there playing basketball, and you might hear my kids bouncing around on the equipment here, not far from the picnic table I'm sitting on, but. The most distinct thing about where I live is we have lots of trees, which means we have lots of birds. So I often like to come out and when the weather's nice, which is finally starting to get nice again, I'll work and do my writing at a place like this, or even just in my backyard. I have a picnic table with a big sun umbrella that I can sit under. And as long as it's not too hot, that's a fantastic place for me to sit and listen to the birds and write. I haven't done a podcast in 7 months. I shut down the podcast in August of 2018, so last year. I got asked to be the general manager of Grow and Convert. Some of you know this. Many of you listening to this will know this. Grow and Convert is a content marketing agency founded by Benji Hayem and Davish Kanal. And it was a complete and total privilege to be asked to run their agency as the general manager. And I did that for August, September, and October last year of 2018. And it was intense. I was in charge of all content, all promotion, all operations, all everything. So it was just a blitz of client calls and sales calls and results and working with a writing team, working with a promotion team, and learning from Benji and Davish, even as they learn from me. And if you know those guys, you know how smart they are and how good they are at what they do. And at the same time, I don't know if you've ever been in a place in your life where you can just tell it's time to do other things and to move on to other roles. And so I could tell after about 3 months of running that agency. And at the end of that time, we had some conversations between me and Benji and Davish, and we decided together that it wasn't really, that GM role wasn't really for me. I was overworked, I was overtaxed, I was pretty burned out, to be honest with you. And so I backed away from that role. I continued to work with them more or less full time. Full time is not a accurate way to say. It was a large retainer contract is the way to say it, and I won't tell you numbers, but it was a retainer contract that was it was a very comfortable amount of money for me, and to support my little guys and my wife. But in December, I dropped down to a little under half of what I was doing before. Did that for December and January, and then by February, I was out again on my own, and so I was back to the world of landing clients and talking to new customers and trying to land new work and working totally for myself. And it was good. It was good. It was scary. It's scary to turn away from a very comfortable, reliable monthly retainer. To drop down to less than half-time for a couple months, and then to nothing from that for a couple months. I had no clients other than GNC for a while there. So I picked up a couple clients while I was working for Grow and Convert part-time, and then February, so maybe 10 weeks ago, something like that, really began to do the work to do some new prospecting and to line up some new clients. So went from working almost exclusively with Grow and Convert to working with Grow and Convert and 2 other clients to now having 7 clients and not working with Grow and Convert, and currently actively talking to several other companies about potential projects. So some of those projects are big projects, some of those projects are small projects, but it's an exciting time for me, and I thought as part of it, it was time to start the podcast again. I've had several people ask me if I was gonna, ever get it back up, because some people have heard my interviews and told me that they wanted more of them. So the one big thing, of all the things I learned during my time at Grow and Convert, and there's a ton, like I've never done work that was better. I've never got better results for clients than the work that I did there. And I will be forever grateful for the experience of having worked with all the clients that I work with through that role that I did with Benji and Davis at last year. If there's one thing I learned as a takeaway, it's that I work better when I'm part of a team, that a collaborative process with other people, so other writers, editors, promotion people. I'm just better. Like, I just do better work personally, and it's more fun. So this time around, I'm not doing a solo freelancing. This time around, I'm trying to build a small team of handpicked, highly trusted people to help me do my work. And so, on that note, we recorded this interview earlier today from Cohatch which is a co-working space outside of Dayton where I work. And I've been working out of that place for, a couple weeks now. I got connected last year with an old friend of mine. Her name's Stefan. We worked together at a corporate company 5-6 years ago, 2012, 2013. And she went off and got a Master of Fine Arts, and I went off and started a freelancing business. And last summer we reconnected. She came back to town after graduating from her master's program and being teaching English composition for a few years. And she was looking for work. And so I roped her in to help me do some things at Grow and Convert. And now I've pulled her in as a contract editor and she's just terrific. And I want to introduce you to her. And I want her to be able to tell you some of what she knows, so that you, if you're somebody who does content marketing, especially if you are somebody who ever reviews the work of other writers, and I know that's a lot of you, like you either hire freelancers or you have a team of freelancers in-house, or maybe you are a writer but you work within a team and sometimes you have to review other people's stuff. Katie's the best editor I've ever met, like by far. I've been an editor, but I can't edit myself. So she's the one that I trust with all of my content. She reads and helps me produce everything I do, both for myself and for our clients. And I want you to hear from her. So I want you to see the power of doing collaborative work versus maybe just trying to do it all on your own. So without further ado, here's me and Katie in conversation. We're talking about how to get the most out of your freelance writers. Katie, this is your first time on a podcast?
This is my first time on a podcast.
But you listen to a ridiculous amount of
constantly,
podcasts,
constantly listening to podcasts.
So people listening to this, they know me.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know you.
Right.
So intro yourself.
My name is Stefan. I have an MFA from the University of Akron and the Northeast Ohio Master of Fine Arts Consortium. And you and I have been working together for about 8 months.
Something like that.
Pretty regularly now.
Yeah. So we are sitting in the quiet room of
the phone call room.
The phone call room at Cohatch, which is the co-working space we're working out of here in Dayton, Ohio. This is the second time I've interviewed someone for the podcast, like in person. So it's kind of cool. There's no lag in the call here.
Nope.
Because you're sitting right here with me. You taught English?
I did. I was a freshman composition instructor while I was getting my master's.
What does that mean?
That means that I was teaching freshman comp 1 or freshman comp 2. And I did that for 6 semesters, essentially the basics of how to write a paper and how to do it well, and like how to have an argument, how to do research, how to tell a compelling story, as well as why it matters that we have commas between phrases and, all that stuff too.
So you're a advocate for things like the Oxford comma?
Yes. As one of my favorite memes says, you can have my Oxford comma when you pry it from my cold, dead, comma, and lifeless hands.
I love how as soon as I talk to people about the fact that I have an editor or use an editor, they immediately start asking grammar questions.
It's like, and question number one is almost always the Oxford comma or no.
Yeah. The answer is yes, by the way. Although also the answer is, if you're writing for the internet, it probably doesn't matter.
I know, and it's a hill I'm trying not to die on, but whatever.
We're going to talk in this episode a lot about editing, about what it is, because I think as someone who has run a writing team for in different forms for a number of companies, the art of editing is really hard. And also there's a lot of people who are editors and don't even know that they are. So creative directors, account managers, anybody who assigns content to a writer and then gets content back from that writer and has to review it and then decide whether or not it's good enough to publish or send to the designer or anything like that you are an editor. And so the skills of a good editor are things that you need to learn, even though I'm sure that nobody ever sends you through a course on how to edit a team of freelance writers or a team of in-house writers.
Yeah, not really.
That's not a thing that exists in the world.
I think I got something really close to it. But My version of that was when I signed up to become an English instructor as a graduate student. I was a graduate TA, teaching assistant. I had a 3-day, 9-hour course before the semester started that was literally, here's how we want you to teach freshman comp. And then we met once a week for the rest of that first semester.
Cool.
And they basically taught me how to grade papers, amongst other things. I mean, we talked about composition theory and things like that too, but that was a crash course in here's how to edit quickly, because as I've done the math, I think I graded close to 2,000 pages of freshman comp papers in 3 years. And you have to get fast or you will die. So
did you have a whole bag full of red pens?
Yes, and green and purple, because red gives people anxiety. So now we do green and purple.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but I love red pens and whatever. I don't really care what color it is, as long as I get to tell you where you should put that comma.
The Google Docs, when you mark up my stuff, it's always in whatever color Google decides for that particular day.
Yeah, I think so.
It's going to be...
Yeah, like today you're hot pink or whatever.
Katie color, yeah. So it does not give me anxiety.
Okay.
So, I guess for anybody listening to this, the value of this in the next half an hour or whatever we're going to talk about is I want to give Katie a chance to talk through some of the things she does. She reads every piece of content that I write, and she has proven to be an extremely effective. She's kind of a little secret weapon for what I do personally. I wrote by myself for many years, and there was always this sort of weird thing when you're so close to your own writing. I would write something and I would send it to the client, and I never really knew how the client was going to react. Sometimes I felt like what I wrote was good, and the client would come back and tell me, that they weren't really feeling it. Other times I would write something and I would be like, I don't know. And I would send it to the client, and the client would come back and be like, this is awesome. And I think that's what happens when you just get so close to your own work. And I think anybody, if you're listening to this and you have written content, you probably know what I mean. Like you spend a day or two working on a draft or something, and you're so close to it, you lose all perspective on it. And there's only two ways that I've personally found to get around that. One is to put it down for a week and then come back to it after you've sort of gotten some space from it. Then you can be a lot more objective. And the other is to have somebody else look at it. And the only way I can turn around content quickly at the quality levels that I want to do today, because we definitely work at the high end of the market, is to have you do it. So yeah, when you came back from teaching and Katie invited me. I have to tell this story. I had invited Katie to join the Content Marketing Lounge Facebook group. Like you were one of the first 100 people I reached out to.
Probably, yeah.
Way back in 2015.
Yeah.
And that invitation just sat in your Facebook Messenger.
Yeah, and I don't know that I even really ignored it. I'm not sure if I even saw it or what. I mean, because there were definitely times when I wasn't even really using Facebook that much. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and I went to get into my Messenger to message you and be like, hey, we should get coffee. I'm coming back into town.
This is summer, last summer, so 2018.
Yeah.
3 years after
like
I had
June,
sent the message.
I think, maybe late May. And I went to message him and I was like, oh, look at that. There's like this invitation sitting there that I never did anything with. What is this Facebook group? So
I got to know. I got two pings from Facebook. One that you wanted to join the group, and then two that you were like, let's get coffee sometime, because I guess you had heard somehow or seen on LinkedIn or something that I was freelancing. And
well, I didn't want to freelance at the time. I was looking to potentially go back to the organization where we had worked together before.
That's right. Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to know how you had done it as someone who had left and returned.
That's true.
And so I wanted some details.
Way back in my story for that.
And that's like 6 years ago now, or 6.5, I think. So yeah. So, and it wasn't until, I distinctly remember telling you like, oh, I'm never going to freelance. Like that is not what I want to do. And within like 2 weeks, I think I still didn't have any bites and was just like sitting there doing nothing. And you're like, so you want to do a freelance thing for me?
I know talent when I see it.
Yeah, and I was also broken board, so it worked out great for everybody.
Yeah, I knew you were extremely talented. I knew you just graduated, and I knew that you didn't have anything else going on.
Yeah, right.
So that was back. That was back when I was running the writing team at Grow and Convert. So I pulled you into the Grow and Convert stuff originally, and then at the beginning of this year, I'm no longer working with Grow and Convert. No hard feelings. Just moving on to other things. But I asked you when I made that move, would you keep reading my stuff?
Yeah, right.
And that evolved into what we have today, which is like you spend half a day here.
Yep.
Most days hanging out, reading my stuff, and doing other various things to help me get things done. So, talk to me about. So let's say that you, Katie, are talking to, like a marketing director, like at a software company or maybe even at like an agency. Mm-hmm. And part of their job is to find freelancers to write content for their blog or for whatever. And they have this problem, which I know a lot of people do, which is they can't seem to find freelancers who will give them the content in like either in the form or shape or that's high enough quality that they can just take it and publish it on the blog. So what would you say to somebody like that?
So this is where an editor would come in. Obviously, I'm a freelance editor, but there are plenty of organizations that have got internal situations where they've got someone that does that as well. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of taking whatever that raw content is and making it as good as possible. So, and that's obviously you want that to be publishable in quality. Yeah. So we're looking at everything from, and it depends on the kind of editing that you want done. And there's lots of different titles for editors, but an editor can do everything from setting up what the whole point of the article is in the first place and working from the very beginning to the very end of the piece as like a developmental editor. And that's someone who's helping develop the ideas, where it's going, making sure that the story that the article is telling is compelling. You might have a line editor who is just doing more specific, making the language look good, maybe doing a little bit of reorganization here and there. You've got copy editors, which are a little bit less than that, where they're just literally making like each sentence look good, or moving the commas and the periods and things like that around too. That's
more proofreading. So yeah, I heard you say three things. So that if you think about it like a spectrum, so out on one side of the spectrum would be developmental editing.
Yep.
And that would be people helping with the strategy of the piece, right? Like the the composition of it?
Mm-hmm.
Does it hit the mark? Does it say what we want it to say?
Yeah, because we obviously, when you're doing marketing writing, there's always a purpose. A lot of the time that's going to be conversion, or it's going to be branding, or et cetera, right? So you're going to look at everything from the top to the bottom and say, what's the point of this? Why are we writing it? And is what we're giving the writer to work with going to accomplish that in the end?
Yeah. And then there's the middle, sort of in the middle of the spectrum would be line editing. And when we say line editing, we mean?
That's going to be less of the overarching stuff, but it might still be some heavy editing just regarding the quality of what's on the page. Mm-hmm. So you're working with what's actually there. You know, this particular sentence doesn't make sense to be in this spot, so we move it to the beginning of the paragraph, or maybe we switch these two paragraphs, or we take what used to be the ending and we make it the beginning, things like that. So
it's always the lead. It's always the lead.
Yeah, right, exactly. Can we hook
intro,
them from the beginning, or et cetera? You know?
It's always the intro. It's like, this is good once I get past the intro, but it doesn't hook me in the intro.
Right.
That's just exactly what you told me yesterday about
like, what is the point of your article?
Why did you
start with a completely different intro?
See, it's even for the most experienced writers, I think having an experienced second set of eyes is super helpful. So that third one being copy editing is more proofreading. Yeah,
and they are technically different depending on who you ask and why they separate that. Like, for instance, I have a client, I still work with Grow and Convert, and I do proofreading for them. But it's technically probably more like copy editing because I'm not literally only checking for glaring errors. Like, I'm also occasionally making some word suggestions and leaving some notes for the writer or for the developmental editor of the piece to say, hey, this word maybe isn't the right one that you wanted here. Yeah. And that's something a proofreader wouldn't really do. So.
But it's not your job to say, in that context, it's not your job to say, hey, the intro's terrible.
Right. No, absolutely not. Right. And that's one of the things that, when you look at that spectrum, having been in situations to do developmental editing and having been in situations to do just proofreading or copy editing, it can be really hard if you're used to working with a piece and guiding it from conception all the way to completion, and then kind of scaling back on that spectrum and being like, okay, you need to stop caring about all this other stuff. There's a different editor that's working on these things. That's not your job. You get to just focus on the little things.
Right.
So, yeah.
Is it so? And now most organizations don't have someone like you. They don't have an editor in house, so it's just the creative director or the account manager or whoever it is that hires the freelancer that is the one reviewing the content. If I'm in that role, do I need to hire somebody like you, or do I need to learn these skills? Talk to me about
I think that's going to depend on your individual chops. So there are plenty of people out there who are decent writers themselves and who can be decent editors. A lot of people can, catch typos in a newspaper article and be like, oh, I can't believe that got through, right? If you're the kind of person who does that, then you'll probably be fine to handle stuff like this.
When I worked at a newspaper, we had a lady who was a former English teacher, retired, who would go through the newspaper every day, mark it up with a red felt tip pen, and then bring it to us. And then they would hang on the wall with our little wall of shame.
And I've been that person. When I was going to community college, I was literally 18 years old. I picked up the community college student-run newspaper, and it just was covered in red pen. And that was a sport for me, which should show you my nature and how passionate I am about this stuff, that I do this crap for fun. But
it's all proofreading.
That's all that was. Yeah. Was just there's words misspelled and, lines cut off and just, why is this period here and a semicolon here and all this punctuation is wrong and, so.
You need to learn the difference between an in dash and an em dash.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, and so, if you are someone who's technically functioning as the editor of whatever it is that you're publishing, even if you don't see yourself as a grammar person or
your title may not be editor.
No.
But
if you're managing that, then you are serving as the editor. So, and then if you are finding that, if you've got experts in, your software as a service or whatever industry that you're in, tech, et cetera, if you've got experts who are writing these stories, but they don't have writing chops themselves, that's where you might need someone to come in who can say, okay, I know the information is there. They've put the information on the page, but it's just not readable as it is. That's where, if you are serving as the director of an agency, basically within an organization or at an agency itself, line editing or whatever is not going to be what you need to be doing with your time. So that's where it becomes beneficial to have an editor who's just set aside to do those specific things.
So that would be developmental editing. So, and really in that situation, you're blurring the line between writer and editor. Because I've been in that situation too, where you have people within the organization that write content and submit it, and it's that they are experts. They know what they're talking about, and they can contribute content that has high quality in terms of subject matter expertise, but the writing itself is just not good. And it's all often, so unfortunately, too often when you get like product experts going in content, they're great. People like that are great to contribute, but they often are they're just writing a brochure about whatever their product is, because that's their job. They love their product.
To sell you this thing that they think is amazing. Yeah.
And they're not able to really get out of that mode. And I'm not sure that I really want them to, because like that's like their whole, they wouldn't be good at their jobs if they weren't in love with all the things that it does. So there I really recommend a ghostwriter. That's where you have somebody who somebody from the marketing team or an outside person who will interview that subject matter expert, but then take that and translate it into something that's accessible for an audience of people who aren't already, familiar with your product or experts at using it. So, but if you've got somebody who's a subject matter expert who, for whatever reason, is pretty can do a pretty good job with it, then you can use an editor to kind of be the person to take it from maybe, grade level 15 down to grade level 8.
Right. And I mean, and there's plenty of people who do that too. Yeah. I mean, we know so many people, including ourselves, who have worked in various other avenues or pursued other careers. I mean, I used to be in sales once upon a time. I did 2 years of automotive industry marketing services selling. So I was literally selling like websites and content management. I mean, all these systems to car dealerships, and nobody would have necessarily thought like I was a writer. Well, I was a writer first. And so you will come across plenty of people, and you yourself might even be one of those people who has a lot of experience in writing, and then also has a lot of experience in whatever this other specific sector is. Right. So, and that's where you or your other writers, etc., might be really good at writing whatever it is that they're writing about. And you only need, something like a copy editor or something at that point. Like a
somebody in that sort of middle range.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But that makes sure that the content is technically good.
Right. Yeah.
Meaning you're not going to have those people who look at it and can tell that it's, not written by somebody who has the expertise. So, and I think, just to make it really concrete. So if you're a creative director, when I was running Grow and Convert, and I had that I was assembling this sort of a team that looks kind of like what we're talking about. I had writers. So there were people who we called them writers. And then I often served as developmental editor. But I also pulled you in to do some of that stuff too. And so I wanted a second set of eyes to work with the writer, a second brain, a second set of somebody who had done the work to understand the market. And I felt like having that that pairing was really valuable. That's what high level professional writers at all levels do. Like magazine writers, novelists, they all have, even the best writers you've ever heard of, like the Stephen Kings of the world, they have people that read their stuff before it gets published. And I think there's this fallacy in the market, especially in the content marketing world, that you can just hire a freelancer, and that freelancer will be able to go out and take a topic or a keyword that you've given them
and just spit out exactly what you need,
and to just come back to you with exactly what you wanted. And I've just never seen that happen where it works the way that the person who's doing the hiring wants. Normally what happens is you'll hire a freelancer they'll go out, they'll do their work, whether that's interview based or research based or whatever method they're using. We'll have another conversation about dumpster diving at some point where we talk through that,
Right.
but that's a different topic for a different conversation. Hopefully they're doing original research and original interviews. Hopefully they're not just rewriting somebody else's blog that they
Something
find
they
on
found
the internet,
on Google.
which is usually what happens, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But that writer will go out, do their work, and then send you back a draft, and it just won't be what you wanted, you know. Yeah. And then you're in a weird situation because now you have a choice. You have to either mark it up and send it back to the writer and hope that they can interpret your suggestions and then fix it.
Yep.
Or you're stuck rewriting it and making it what you wanted.
Either of which is going to take additional time.
Yes.
And in a world like this, time is money. So
that's true. And normally you're up against content publishing deadlines. And so I've had
content calendars.
Oh man, I can't even tell you how many times I've been faced with this with the decision of the only way to get this done on time is to put in my own time, but I don't really have that time right now because I wasn't expecting to get something that was so far off the mark. And it took a long time for me to learn that. So I think probably a lot of people, you know, who would benefit from this conversation they're in that situation where they know what I'm talking about, that situation where I either have to rewrite this or I have to send it back with changes. And when you send it back with changes, there's risk there too, because the writer may or may not be able to take what you've suggested and then fix it. Like you may end up in this thing where you do 2 to 3 rounds of edits and it's still not what you wanted. And now you're a week behind. Yeah. And you still have to rewrite it.
And then you also like that might erode your trust with the writer too. Exactly. And then you're like, well, can I use them again? Because they didn't give me what I wanted in the first place and they didn't do it after 3 tries either. So, you know.
So that's where I hope that, we'll talk here in just a minute about some specific strategies, but I hope that's where I think either developing your own skills as an editor will help, or considering bringing in somebody like you, which is what I've done,
right?
Like that to be that second set of eyes to help give comments and feedback to the people who are doing the writing, so that you don't have to be the one who, you know, makes that decision of, do I rewrite this whole thing from scratch?
Right.
Or do I give it to another writer and pay 2 people to do a piece of content when there's no guarantee that the second person will even get it done the way I want it? Those decisions, an editor, a developmental editor, so an editor in the kind of, you know, book editor role can be that person. So maybe that's a role that you haven't thought of ever hiring for, either in-house or through an agency or through a freelancer. But that's what you do for me. And I'd love for you to talk more about that particular role, because that's where you contribute a tremendous amount of secret value to the things that I write.
Well, and that's what.
So let's walk through the process of like what it normally looks like when I write a piece and I give it to you, and how you mark it up. And
so part of the reason I think it has been hard for me to just do proofreading or just do copy editing is because pretty much anytime I sit down to read a piece with any sort of critical eye, and that's frankly going to happen anytime I read literally anything. Like if I pick up a book that I got at Barnes & Noble tomorrow, like I'm going to be reading it with a critical eye.
You have 6 years of English.
I have, my undergrad was in creative writing. My master's was in creative writing, right? So it's just like becomes a thing that you can't turn off, right?
How many hundreds of thousands of words do you think you've written over your career?
Oh my God, I don't know. My thesis was 53,000.
There you go.
So, but who knows with everything else? So that doesn't count all the journals and the everything else that nobody's ever even seen. But so I write a lot, and I mean, I started young, but it's funny to me that like this whole developmental editing thing was something that you kind of introduced me to doing. It was never something that I set about to do. It was
it's not a thing that's really well known or talked about anywhere.
Right.
So yeah.
And nobody when they're like 4 years old and loves reading says, I want to grow up and be a developmental editor. Like that's just not what you do.
It's firefighter.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly.
Baseball player.
You want to be a teacher, or you want to, like I want to write books. Everybody says I want to write books, like I want to be a writer. And well, for me, like I love writing, but writing is a very specific thing to me. And it takes me, for whatever reason, it takes me a lot more energy to be a writer than it does for me to be an editor. And I'm not sure why that is. I think it's just my personal wheelhouse and my personality and my strengths and everything else, that like, if I'm having a bad day and I need to write an article, it's going to be like pulling teeth to get that article out of myself. If I'm having a bad day and I need to proofread something, no problem.
Yeah,
like,
and I saw that in you with the Grow and Convert stuff.
Which is kind of how that we switched me over from that. It just kind of became something you needed at the same time that I needed to be able to do more editing and less writing. So, but yeah, when we talk about like, you know, what I actually see when I look down at a piece and read it, is I'm just reading it as any reader would. Like, I try to be as objective as possible. And I don't think that's something I conscientiously started trying to do. I think it's just something that I notice. So if I'm reading a piece and I get to a section that doesn't make any sense, like I'm reading this piece for the first time. If I don't understand it, then nobody else is going to understand it. And it's as simple as that. And that might be a word choice. That might be an entire introduction to a piece. That could be why you structure the piece that you have, or in the order that you have. Which is like when we talked yesterday, like you had written an introduction thinking you were going to go somewhere with a piece.
2,200 words.
Yeah.
2,200 words in that piece.
Not an unsubstantial piece. Right. And like the first 3 or 4 little paragraphs had almost nothing to do with the whole rest of the piece. And I was like, and I loved the rest of the piece. I just didn't get the setup. And it was you as a writer in your first draft had just kind of changed gears a little bit. And had not gone back and had not adjusted the introduction.
Right. I have to comment on that because I was in the role of developmental editor for a lot of pieces, especially during the Grow and Convert time. And it seems like that was where most of our work was in the first 3, 4, 5 paragraphs.
Always the introduction,
So, to the point where we had this joke.
And I saw that too.
And an ongoing, running joke was that like, it's always the intro.
Yeah.
We always have to fix the intro.
It is always the intro.
But we can usually get the title pretty close and we can get the basic points of the article.
Yeah.
And so here's some hacks for people listening to this. So when we're talking in vague terms, so let me talk about some specifics of how to structure some different types of articles. So the most popular article that happens in content marketing is some type of list. So that can either be just a straightforward list post. So 10 tools you can use in content marketing, right?
Yep.
And then there's an intro and then there's a list. And the H2 subheads in the list are, the tools. Yep. So number one, give me a tool, anything. Photoshop.
Okay.
So there we go. Number 2, sketch, right?
Yeah, right.
Number 3,
screenshot.
There you go. Yeah. Google Docs, even something like that. And you just each section within the article, each H2 subhead is 50 to 100 words or something like that. And the thing about a list post though is that those 10 or 20 or 54 or whatever, they can go in any order. Like you can move more up, right? So that's a list. There's also a how-to, which from a writing perspective sets up exactly the same.
Yep.
The only difference is that there's a certain sequence that has to be followed.
Yep.
So now instead of talking about individual tools or individual something, you take a process and you go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And so those have to go in sequence. But from the person who's written about 1,000 of those,
right?
The process of writing it is the same. Like the sections look the same. Visually, it kind of looks the same. And so the list part of it is actually pretty straightforward and not that hard to put together because, I know that I'm going to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, or tool 1, tool 3, tool 2, tool 3. But the hard part is always the intro because the intro is it needs to have some sort of way to hook the reader into telling them why this is important.
Yeah. It's got to compel you into reading the rest of the list.
Right. And so often what I see in content marketing articles in particular is the intro is something like, everyone knows that in 2019, content marketing is important. And I just it just makes me want to I don't know, like never read that person's content ever again. It's like, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
I'm done. Like, nobody who is actually a content marketing practitioner needs to be told that content marketing is important.
Yeah, right.
Like,
exactly.
we're already, like, this is our career. Like,
Yeah.
like we do this every day. Like, you don't have to convince me or a business owner or anybody that's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even landed on this particular article. So instead, there's really two, maybe three ways to start an article. One is a story. So you say, 3 weeks ago I was here, and a little illustration, a parable really is what we're doing. And that can be 3-4 paragraphs, 5 paragraphs, to illustrate the importance of why this is happening. 2 is some sort of startling statistic. So something like over 70% of salespeople never make more than one phone call to a prospect.
Whatever,
like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you serious? Are you telling me that like all I have to do is make a few phone calls, like, and follow up, and I'll be way ahead of the pack? Tell me, like, now I'm kind of interested. I kind of want to know more. And then the third one is something like, so story, statistic, and then the third one is if you've got some sort of thing that is a direct pain point for the people reading it. This is really the best, where you can call out, the pain of what they're already feeling. So in the case of editing, probably nobody who's listening to this is thinking like, oh yeah, I need editing.
Yeah,
I need to learn about editing.
Right.
So I wouldn't
Nobody's
start.
looking at the solution. Yeah, from a sales perspective, I mean, if you're like, obviously I have some sales experience, but you're not trying to sell them the solution without telling them what their problem was in the first place. And that's what that introduction is going to serve as in that particular way. Yeah.
So you can't just assume that people want to know more about whatever this topic is. The intro is about telling them why it's important. So, and like the article we're writing for editing to go with this, that'll be similar to what we're talking about in this podcast. We'll start with calling out the pain of having to rewrite content for anybody who's hiring freelancers or anybody who's running a marketing team. Because I've had to do it, you've had to do it.
Right.
That, of all the things that are painful in the world of marketing, being the person who receives content that's not good enough is about as frustrating as it gets.
It's been the bane of my existence.
It's about as frustrating as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Because it just wrecks everything. It makes puts you in a bad mood, and it puts you behind and everything. So those are sort of the 3 ways that you can put those 3 intros on top of any kind of article. It can be a how-to article. It can be a list post. It can be, just telling a story of somebody's, something interesting that you know about. Thought leadership pieces too could be started that way. But hopefully that gives people like some concrete something to look for when they receive content from somebody else. So, so talk about what happens when I send you a piece. Like, what do you look for?
I just sit down and start reading and see if it makes sense. I mean, like it's not something that I'm not formulaic about it, because writing is not that formulaic. I mean, there are plenty of formulas that we have to help ourselves write faster and produce content faster, because we need to have them.
Those frameworks I just talked about are the ones that I use all the time, so you don't.
Right,
They're
exactly.
always going to have to be there.
Yeah, and I'm used to seeing those, but even you sit down once in a while, like we were talking about the one yesterday, like you sit down, you start writing, and it doesn't always just go exactly that way.
That one totally didn't.
So, yeah. and I mean, there's something to be said too for like the drafting process, like in the revision process, when you talk about like giving yourself time to go back and look at it, in an ideal world, we could all edit ourselves.
Yeah.
But for one thing, a lot of writers just are not good editors. They're really not good at editing themselves. But for another, most of the time we don't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
So, I feel like I look back to a year ago when I was, I guess, 13 months ago or so, when I was like finishing up my master's thesis and like submitting it, and I was writing a couple nonfiction essays right at the last second and throwing them in. And it's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to turn this in, and I'm not going to have that week to go back and look at these again. Or like, I'm going to have 3 days, but I know that's not enough. And so that's one of those situations where it's like, all right, who do I trust that can look at this now and be that second set of eyes for me? So, and so when I sit down and actually look at your stuff, a lot of the time I know it's going to be good to begin with because you are a strong writer. You've done this a ton. Like you have these formulas that you have set up. Like yesterday, you usually have some sort of tip off to me that you feel like something is not quite there yet. And it'll be like this sideways kind of like, read this and let me know what you think. Like there's always a tone of voice and there's some kind of awkward pause that's like,
I'm trying not
what you're not saying is I don't like this, but I don't know why.
That's
like,
so true. And I'm trying not to influence your reaction, but there's no way for me to tell you,
right,
you should read this and I have no idea what I'm looking for,
right,
but I don't like it.
Yeah. So a lot of times there's a tip off. But that's because you and I work together in person and we have those conversations. But like, we at least know each other well enough that even if we were like slacking at each other from long distance,
you'd still get it.
We'd still, there would be an ellipses in there that you would have added to be like, awkward pause. Here's what I'm, like, so.
Can you read this horrible thing that I don't like and tell me what's wrong with it?
So I at least have that kind of a tip off. When I'm working with other clients of mine long distance, I don't have that at all, especially not if I'm doing volume for them, if I'm doing a lot of proofreads over time. And they have lots of different writers and they have different developmental editors or whatever else. So I don't know what I'm going to be opening every single time I open it. Yeah. I'm coming at it with a completely blank slate and not knowing what to expect.
I feel like that's probably the experience for most people. That because you, especially like most of the times when I would receive work from writers, even to today with the writers that we continue to work with, they usually just say, "Here's the draft."
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
Like you don't, and I don't know from them if they think it's a strong draft or if they're not sure if it's a strong draft. Yeah. Over time, I learned like from each writer kind of what to expect.
Absolutely.
But still, like I usually don't get commentary on it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I used to work in a very high volume editing environment. Where I was editing 15 pieces a day from 15 different writers. And I still, at a pool of, 50 writers or whatever, I would see them all on such a regular basis that I knew every single time I was opening one from that writer, like, oh, this is going to be awful. Or, oh, this one's going to go quickly. Or, because you start to learn those writers and their quirks and their repeated errors or whatever else. So, but that kind of gets me back to like this whole like collaborative editing and like, why it's so important to foster some sort of a relationship, because the more you edit the same writer and the more the writer interacts with you, the better you're going to get to know each other. And I'm going to know from the time that you send me something what to expect because I'm used to your quality. And then also you're going to give me those clues like awkward pauses or whatever else that like keep your eyes open on this one. Like, and it's never like, at least with you, I know it's never going to be like, oh, there's no commas in this entire piece. Like that's not really an issue. The issue is going to be like, I don't really like the structure of this and I don't feel like it's compelling and it's kind of bigger picture questions, which for me is great because I would rather work on that level. Like that's just kind of where, I'd like to be able to help a piece along and guide the writer in that way too. Cause at the end of the day, I'm still like a teacher. So
I think I'm very collaborative and I value what you do. And I think, but I also think that there are some writers who are a little sensitive to feedback.
Oh, for sure.
What do you do in those situations?
I think it depends. I've been in situations where particular writers have been notorious for not taking feedback well. I was not in a position to do anything about that. If I had been in a position to do something about that, I probably just would have stopped using that writer because like we're all on a team together. We're trying to complete a mission and we need to do it as quickly and as thoroughly as possible together. And so if I'm getting pushback from a writer who is like, well, I did what you wanted me to do. It's like, no, you did what you did. You didn't do what I needed you to do. Like, I'm sorry that that's how you took it or whatever. And if everyone comes to the table with the understanding this is going to be a collaborative process and like there will be revisions and that's not a personal slight on anyone. That's just, the way that the process has to work. I write and I edit and like the first time I submitted something to you that was just utter garbage, like I knew it. Like I didn't know it when I submitted it, but like you were like, this wasn't your best piece. And I like went back through and I was like, oh my God, this was not my best piece. Like it was just trash.
Yeah, we got it there.
We did, but you know, like
I believe that's the one that shows up in your portfolio now.
It might be one of them. Yeah. But that's the thing. Like I at least had the space of mind or whatever you want to call it to be like, okay, yes, like Nathan knows what he's talking about. He would not personally attack my writing skills for fun. Like that's not.
That's right.
The point.
I forgot. Like I don't know why I hadn't even thought of it. Like here I am thinking about you as my editor, but I was your editor.
You
first.
were my editor first.
Yeah, right. We did 3 pieces that way.
Oh, I think we did more than. I think I did 5. No,
might
have been 7. It was a lot. I wrote a lot of pieces, and then
I eventually just decided that you were. I needed you.
I was more valuable as an editor.
Yeah.
So.
And you seemed like you had a lot more energy around editing anyway.
Right. I was making a career change. I didn't have the time to do the writing as well as it can sometimes take me to do. So it just made more sense. Yeah.
That whole like get the right people and then find the right people first. And then sometimes you might have to like move them to different chairs on the bus if you want to do your good to great stuff. But okay, so you said collaboration about 30 times so far. Is there ever a world in which you could give a writer an assignment and what comes back to you is basically publish ready on the first shot?
I'm sure it has happened. But I'm guessing it hasn't happened without that writer serving as their own editor anyways.
Or maybe secretly having their own editor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many people, you know, I don't know if I've ever worked with a writer who doesn't have their own proofreader before they send it in.
Most writers don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Most writers don't. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that kind of deal. But you know, if I write a piece, you know, one night and then I sleep on it and then I check it again 24 hours later because I've got, say, 3-day turnaround, then, you know, I've essentially just served as my own editor before I've turned it in to the real editor, or the agency or whoever it is. So, and that's where I would catch my own like misspellings and, you know, incorrect punctuation and everything else too. But it just kind of depends. Again, it's going to come back to like your experience as a writer, whether you've got things like these formulaic setups for how to crank out content faster, you know, things like that will help. But I would say in general, like most editors or people functioning as editors who are getting things ready to publish, I mean, I personally wouldn't ever trust any writer to just copy and paste something without reading it first. Mm-hmm. So if you're the kind of editor or agency runner who does that, good for you. But I don't have that kind of faith in anybody, like least of all myself.
And that includes me. I just want to make it clear. I'm included in this list. I'm with you. Like I think it's a total thinking that you can create a factory setup where, you know, the writer is like the person who bolts doors on the car and it's going to be right 99% of the time is unrealistic. Yeah. Writing is a creative endeavor. Like we're breathing,
whether we like it or not,
we're breathing into existence something that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
You know, there are some, so you might be doing content marketing and you might be doing fairly formulaic, I hate to say it, but low quality stuff. Mm-hmm. Like if content marketing for you is basically keywords and SEO, then maybe it's not as important. You know, maybe you can crank out articles that are 300 words long and you can have a writer who can do 3 or 4 a day. If that's the model you have, then you can probably have some writers. You can probably find some writers that will give you.
And I've been in a situation where I was that writer, where I was given that kind of responsibility and somebody was like, look, we need these articles written yesterday. Can you just upload them now?
Yeah.
And I would do it.
Throw them into our WordPress and click publish.
Yep. And I would crank it out. I would proofread it myself and then put it up and nobody else ever looked at it.
Yeah. But that's stuff that's created using the just Google research paper method. You're not doing original research. You're not doing, you know, high level stuff like what we write. Mm-hmm. For anybody who has quality as sort of the you know, a key focus of their content marketing strategy, which is always where we've lived. Same with our experience at Grow and Convert. Yeah. I worked with very good writers. Like we had a team and we still have significant, like a network of people who are very good writers, high level, very widely paid, relative to many other writers. And in most of the time, the stuff doesn't come back perfectly on the first shot. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
That to write really high level content takes some collaboration. I firmly and strongly believe that. So if you're somebody who's sitting in an agency, or in-house agency, or external agency, or you're just part of a creative department, my best advice, based on lots and lots and lots of experience and years doing this, and I ran a content team at our former employer for a while too, where we had, 20 people contributing, and I was serving as editor there too,
including subject matter experts who were not writers.
Yes. My best advice is there should be somebody on your team, whether that's you or somebody else, and it might need to be somebody else who part of their job is to be that second set of eyes for the writer. And maybe that person can work with the writer to get the content to a place where they feel good about it together before it comes to your desk. And I think that for me has been the formula for getting content that I don't have to spend nearly as much time thinking about, reworking, giving comments on. Like when I pulled you in to be developmental editor with one of the other very good writers that we both know and trust and enjoy working with, the content that you two produced together, like I was still overseeing that whole thing, but I didn't have to worry about it.
Right.
Like I just didn't. Like I would read through it
at that point.
Yeah, I would read through it,
Yeah.
and that's how I got what I wanted. What I wanted was, we were at the volume at that point where I couldn't be the development.
Yeah, you couldn't do everything for everybody.
We were doing, just there's so much volume that I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't give personal feedback to every single piece that came through. And so even though I couldn't just hire one writer and expect that one writer to give me what I wanted on the first time I look at it, the two of you together could.
Yeah.
And that's how that model of having a writer plus an editor on each piece, that's how I got what I needed as a manager. So that's my sort of high level advice for anybody thinking about this kind of thing, and the process steps that you might need to put in place to make your life a little less hectic. So, if you're anybody who has struggled with receiving content from writers that isn't up to your own standards, that second set of eyes, I mean, it can be your assistant director, it can be just somebody on your team that for whatever reason seems to have a knack for editing. There are people who are like you are just naturally built for editing.
Yeah, I don't know how that works. I don't know. Like I said, not something I planned on as a child, but I really seem to be pretty good at it, but I really enjoy it too. And I never thought I was going to be one of those people that hand me a red pen. I can't wait to mark this up. I feel like a total monster. When I was in high school, I was in, I think, honors advanced chemistry with another girl who was obsessed with math. She's like, "Oh, I just love numbers." And I was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I feel like there's plenty of people who probably hear me go "Oh, I love editing." And I'm like, "The hell's wrong with you?"
We'll diagram some sentences here after.
Yeah, exactly.
After you're done. Cool. Was there anything else that we didn't hit on the topic of editing that you had in your little note sheet there that we need to cover? Because I do want to hit sort of the last steps in a second, but is there anything we haven't talked about yet about this sort of developmental editing stuff?
Just the one tip or trick that I would give is that I think really works well for me, that I think kind of sets me apart as my own kind of distinct editor, is I love using comment functions. Because to me, that makes the editing process as collaborative as possible, because I'm not just fixing your mistakes. I am having a conversation with you about what is going on this particular word choice, or the way this sentence is structured, or why you wrote this intro the way that you did. And so, I'll highlight exactly the text that I want. I'll add a comment if we're using Google Docs, or if you're using words track changes, I think it's notes. And I will just say, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I think maybe you intended, but I'm not sure. So I'm going to kick it back to you to make that decision. I could go through and just function as a copy editor and fix all these apparent mistakes. But that's going to take some guessing on my part in certain instances. And you're still the writer, especially if your byline is on that piece. Like, I don't want to make decisions for you that could be incorrect.
Right.
So that's kind of why I rely on those. And like, it might be something as simple as like, this word is almost the word I think you meant, but I think you meant this one. And I do that a lot. But, you know, I'd rather be safe than sorry as an editor and like let the writer make that final decision. Especially if there's, you know, other people at work or whatever that have influence over what exactly the tone of the piece is, right, or things like that too.
I really like that, because that's what you do with my pieces, is that you'll, sometimes it's simple stuff, something as simple as, hey, you use this word 3 times in a row in 3 sentences. Maybe we could use a different word.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's the kind of thing that like when you're writing, you don't realize you're doing.
Yeah.
But
so let's quickly walk through the end game. So we've talked mostly about developmental editing, excuse me. There is what happens at the end. So after you look at a piece, you'll give comments. I'll revise it based on your feedback. And then I'll send it to you, and then you take off your developmental editor hat, and then what do you do? And
then I basically proofread or copy edit at that point.
And
that's when I'm looking for, you know, is there accidentally a hyphen here instead of an M dash? And are there, you know, 2 spaces on either side of that M dash? Or should this ellipses be an M dash? Or should these comma separated parenthetical values be in parentheses? You know, things like that. So that's where it comes down to like simple things like style adherence to, you know, we usually do AP style plus Oxford comma.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm going to get into things like that.
Yeah.
If I'm developmental editing and I've taken a first pass at it, a lot of times I'll fix some of that stuff right out of the box. Just because it's easy because I saw it the first time and I know it'll be less for me to do in the end.
Well, yeah, at that point you can tell whether or not the piece is going to be mostly what it is now, or you need to completely redo it.
Exactly.
If you need to tell the writer, hey, we need to completely redo either all or sections of this, it doesn't make sense to do a copy.
Right, because I'm going to have to copy edit it again anyways, because it's going to be all fresh content.
And that's really hard. That's really hard for a lot of editors and even just managers. Like when you get a piece and you start reading it and there's grammar mistakes.
Yeah.
You have to ignore those on the first pass, and too often people just get stuck on the grammar mistakes, and they're not reading it from a high level on the first pass. So leave the copy editing to the very end, so that you don't have to do it 6 times.
Yeah, exactly.
We do use Grammarly, so I like Grammarly. It's not 100%. Another hack is to take your Mac, and I'll include a link. There'll be a blog post that goes with this story. So we'll include screenshots of some of the comments that you give on my pieces. It'll be kind of meta because I'll have the the screenshots from the article that you're reading. But I do want, you know, you to be able to, anyone listening to this, to be able to see kind of what you're talking about and how you do that. But then listening to the content in your headphones is just, that really did change the quality of my work when I started to do that. So I would, on a Mac, you can just like click edit, and then there's a thing called start speaking. I'll include a screenshot of how to do that as well in the article. But that will read the content back to you in your headphones. And that old tip, like read your content out loud so you hear the weird spots.
Yep.
It's even better if somebody else reads it.
Yeah.
So that I do. Anne Lamott has a thing similar. If you want to try it, I personally don't do this. She calls it putting it back through the typewriter. So she'll retype what she's already written. It's a similar process. She's trying to catch awkward sentences and smooth out some of her language by retyping over it. So maybe that will be beneficial for some people. I personally don't do that. I find that having it read back to me in my headphones is enough for me to feel good about it. So to close, I would tell some stories on me. Like what are my writing tics?
Oh my God.
So what are the things I do all the time that you always have to fix and drive you crazy?
The funniest one is, and I think I mentioned this in the blog post that we're writing, is that I only recently saw a very rough draft from you. Like usually I see things a little bit more published, and you had ellipses all through it. And you were like, oh yeah, I always do that at the beginning, and I always
We're talking like 2,000 words, like 25 ellipses.
I don't know. I mean, it was a lot. But the funniest thing to me though is, and I've known this now for months, is that you use M dashes like
everywhere.
It's salt and pepper. Like it's just gonna be everywhere, and those will stay in until the end, and you like them. So that's one of those funny things that, like, I swear, I think you did. There was a piece not too long ago that I did a Control F and I did a search. It was like
50.
literally like every 112 words there was another one or so. I mean, I forget how
so
many.
That would have been 25 or so.
I forget how often it was, but I was just like, did you know what your ratio of words to
M
dashes is? Which there's a part of me that really enjoys statistical analysis of language. I believe the book is called, is it Nabokov's favorite
Nabokov's favorite color is mauve.
Yes. Yeah.
By
a guy named,
desk.
I want to say Ben Britt.
I don't remember
I
his
forget.
name.
But yeah, it's literally just they fed all this classic literature, including some fan fiction of it, into an analyzer and like pulled out all this statistical information. And I, for whatever reason, love that stuff. So yeah, that's your big tick is all your M dashes.
Yeah,
so.
I like M dashes to defend myself slightly. M dashes are a way to create some rhythm to some otherwise boring writing a lot of times. They also
are commas.
They give emphasis at the end of a sentence. And well, honestly, I use M dashes where I want to create a mental break in the reading. However, from a grammar perspective, the comma is not appropriate at that spot.
Right.
So, so I have a singular subject with a dual verb, and I want to split the verbs.
Right. Yeah,
and so I'll go M dash, and because the M dash is kind of it's a little bit of a wild card punctuation spot.
Yeah.
Punctuation mark. So, however, I have been known to overuse it. So that is true. Very cool. So thanks, Katie, for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for picking my brain.
Katie and I are going to have a lot more of these, so we're gonna talk more. We want to give you the listener kind of a backseat view, maybe background view, kind of like commentary
backstage view.
Backstage, there you go. Like what's the thing that they do on movies where the director's commentary?
Yes.
Yeah, like that.
Exactly.
Just kind of into how we do what we do, because we know just from talking to a lot of other people that there's everyone that we've met that does content marketing has a slightly different take on things, and ours is pretty unique. And so we get asked a lot of questions about how we do things. So hopefully this kind of conversation will be helpful to you, no matter what your role is. If you want more from us, the first thing I want to say is we're for hire. You can hire me personally as a writer, or anymore it's people that I work with. So we're building a little team of hand-picked writers that we know and trust, and can create really high-level content. So if you're thinking like, man, we need better quality stuff, if you've gotten hit by the Google penalty from last year, it's not really a penalty, just the algorithm change, where many of you have. I've talked to a number of people lately who used to be doing high volume, and it's just not working the way it used to. Give us a call, and we'll talk through some new strategies that are working today that maybe didn't work a year ago with the kind of content that we're doing. So that you can callyourmarketing.com is the place to go for that. It's more or less just a listing of how to get in touch. There's not a whole lot there other than the blog. Yep. So callyourmarketing.com/blog is where you can find like a whole bunch of interesting content, including the blog post that'll go with this podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, your favorite podcast player. I got to get us up on Spotify because right now we're on Spotify, not on Spotify, but hopefully by the time this publishes, I'll have that corrected. There's also the Facebook group. So that's called the Content Marketing Lounge. And you can just search for that in Facebook, and I'm sure you'll find it. We are 4,100-ish people and growing, which is crazy to think about. When I started that group 3 years ago, that it would get to be to even that number. It's not a huge group by Facebook standards, but I'm really proud of the conversation that happens in there. And I like to say we're the most helpful group of non-spammy marketers on Facebook, which I don't think is lying even.
Yeah, no, I refer a lot of people to it. Just even if they're not freelancers, if they're just interested in content marketing at all, I think it's a great place to see other people's questions and ask questions and have a whole group of people that you can crowdsource for help on things. Yeah,
we're going to use that group a little bit more in the future to kind of have a conversation back and forth, and we'll use this podcast to expand on some of the topics that pop up there. So last thing is I do have a small newsletter. It's tinyletter.com/Nathan Collier. You can subscribe to the newsletter. That's linked also on the site. So thanks for coming in, thanks for, you're always here.
I am. Yeah, I'm around. I'm around a lot.
Thanks for spending an hour with me talking about editing.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.